Thank you very much, everyone. My name is Micheal Toporcer. I'm a Chief Creative Officer at XLAB Realtime, and we build experiences, metaverse experiences, Web3 experiences for corporations mostly, with clients like Microsoft, TikTok, Calvin Klein. And I've got a wonderful panel for you today, a panel of experts in different sides of the field. And one of the advantages of the down market, we could say, is that there are builders who stayed and other people who didn't. And I believe that many of you are builders of the new projects, and hopefully this conversation will be helpful too. We will try to go into very practical aspects of the field, give you some tips onto how to build the projects, what can help you, what the users are doing. And we will take a look at it from a perspective of user research, project management, design, so we'll try to cover a wide area of expertise. So let me introduce you to our panel. So we've got Georgia from the User Research DEO, which, am I correct, you went into freelance research and are now doing a lot of interesting work. So she's the one who can be your contact for the news, insights, and will tell us more about what the research field is doing. We've got a wonderful panel with Zak, who's a project manager or product leader at Plaid. They are doing wonderful stuff. He'll tell us a little bit more into like what do we think is going to happen in Web3 market. I'm looking for the insights. Then we get Jouni, who's from Aave chain, and will tell us a little bit more about what they do. And we've got Desi, a designer, a leader, and a studio, and a wonderful woman who created her own company and is now growing it, and you know, is in the space and is very successful. So I would start by asking a very simple question. The field is kind of complex for the new people who are building new products. What do you guys do in your daily work that is helping these new companies, our audience in their field? Let's start with you, Georgia.
Thank you. So I'm a user researcher. I specialize in understanding or helping teams understand their users and build better experiences for that. So as exists in Web3 right now, there is like this lack of data about real people and what they're doing in Web3. A lot of that is intentional because of, you know, preserving people's privacy, or it just may be bad practice and just not doing the activity of innately understanding your audience. So I come in and help teams do that, and I'm building out a user research DAO of expert user researchers who have that Web3 knowledge in order to support as many teams as possible.
Yeah, I'm Zak. I'm a product lead at Plaid. I think my interaction for Web3 is focused on three things. It's, you know, one, the on-ramp and off-ramps need to be simple. Access to the ecosystem shouldn't be a 12-meter gate that you climb over. Two, from the financial services perspective, Web3 and crypto in general are global by default, which is like new in the kind of history of humankind for financial services. That doesn't happen easily, though, to on-ramp, fiat from your bank account in the US. There are very different technical projects than to on-ramp from your bank account in the UK or France. And then the third one is kind of more of a hobby and something that I try to evangelize, which is like getting buzzwords out of the ecosystem and making it digestible for regular users. Everyone here knows what on-ramp means. That's not a thing that you would say on the street unless you were going up a ramp. And so working with our customers like Gemini and Kraken to make the user experience as easy as possible so that they can actually interact with those companies' products and not ours.
Great. So as you can see, we will have a lot of different sides to the story because Web3 is like financial side, it's a governance side, it's a metaverse experience side. So we'll take a look at different areas. So Jouni, you as a design director, I would also like to ask you, what was your journey to Web3? Because you have a lot of experience from time before, and how did you get to?
Sure. Yeah, so I got into Ethereum. There used to be really good Ethereum meetups in London. Actually, even before Ethereum launched, I used to do them in the city, and they've continued. I think they're still going on. I haven't been for a while, but I sort of missed that. I was somewhat interested in decentralization for a long time. Wasn't that involved in Bitcoin, but when Ethereum came and it was sort of programmable programmable. It was very interesting, and I was working in open source at the time, so I sort of shifted between design agencies and tech companies at that time, but was gravitating more towards open source projects. And I was working at this company called Canonical, building like a mobile operating system at the time in London. And yeah, I think is like, for many in the field, I think you just get interested in something, you immerse yourself into it, and then you sort of slowly over time make the shift from whatever your sort of non-related job or career is. If you're interested enough, you make the shift into that. And I think Web3 space, I think, is great because it's very welcoming. It's also very early on, so I think it's a great time for people to get involved, both on design side or whatever your sort of expertise is.
Yeah, I agree. Like Web3 space is something like Gold Rush, when people went to Klondike to Alaska, and it's like a big promise but a tough journey ahead. So Desi, tell us a little bit about your journey. Where did you get to, and what do you do now?
So we started our agency 3 years ago. In the beginning, we were specializing in product design, but in the last year and a half, 90% of our projects have been building brand identity and user experience, product design for Web3 companies. So it was purely by luck, and just because we, as founders and our team, we fell in love with the space, and like every project brings a new project, and we've just been referred by our clients, and that's been our journey so far. The last year and a half, 90% of our projects are Web3.
Great. So we will take you through a couple of themes. I want to start by asking about challenges and discussing what are the challenges right now. Then we'll look at the transition from Web 2 to Web 3 and some tips and practical guidance to how to build Web3 products. So Georgia, what is the user experience challenge, or why is UX, UI so poor right now in Web 3?
So there's a few reasons, and I think probably everybody here has had experience of trying something in Web3 and going, what the hell is this? How does it work? And also, what does it do? And it's a very poor experience for somebody to only work out what something does once they've done it, especially if you're spending money to do that. So that's very, very poor experience. So I see that a lot. And part of the reason for this, there's a few reasons why this has happened in Web3, why the best practices of designing something that's usable, useful, and delightful for your target audience has been sort of scrapped. And it's because of financial incentives. So one of the major challenges is that a Web3 team can raise a lot of money on a promise and then have an infinite amount of runway in order to not deliver on the promise. Now, those days are kind of becoming behind us a little bit. But I've talked to teams, I won't name one in particular, but a really big, and I don't think they're in the room, really, really big DeFi application. They built an education portal to help new users understand DeFi, decentralized finance. And I spoke with them, we'd had a few conversations. I said, it really could do a lot more. Let's do some user research to try and help, let's test it with brand new people. Do they understand this? Can they do it? And they said, we're not bothered, we make enough money. Right, and so that's a short-term mindset. That's not a long-term mindset because someone else will come in and do it and take that away. So I'm hoping that that we will get to a more mature stage of tokenomics that prevent teams from raising a lot right at the start on very little, and then not having the motivation to actually create something and test the product market fit. If you think about what happens in the Web 2 world, okay, if you've set up some successful companies in the past, then someone's going to give you loads of money to start something new. But in most instances, you have to prove it has a purpose. You have to prove that there's an audience for it and that customers will pay for it. You don't have to do that in Web 3. So there's not an incentive to make something usable, useful, and delightful. I think also another problem is that there is a lack of UX maturity in the space. So people don't really understand what UX means. They think it is UI only. It's what it looks like, where the buttons are placed, and what words you have on your web page. But they're not thinking about the fact that user experience is actually every single touch point a user has about your product, including what they think about it, how they talk about it, what they do after they've used it as well. And because a lot of product teams are engineering and finance focused, they might have teams that just outsource development and have no designer attached to them. They've outsourced that too, which means that they just don't understand that the decisions they make at protocol level affect the user experience. So they're designing systems, on paper and in white papers that actually are user experience, but they don't realize that that's the case. So I'm hoping that we'll reach a greater stage of UX maturity as things go on, and I am seeing that definitely.
Which actually is a great transition to Zak. You are building product, you are a leader of a team and have to balance all of these aspects, right? Like how do we kind of look at the user? How do we do it more like pro-user? Do we know what we're doing? Do we create something totally new that we don't know if it works? Does it work? Like the whole life cycle of decision making in product is incredibly complex. So what do you see as like the main obstacles to adoption? And in your daily journey, how do you view this like user research? Do you have enough data? What's happening there?
Yeah, so I think that the main obstacle has always been the same, and that's the incentive to do things that are cool versus things that are useful. There's just so much in the ecosystem for like engineers and products people to explore, and like a good thought exercise in this is like think of a thing that you use a lot, and then think of that thing when it was new and how usable it was. Like the initial television was probably the size of this room, roughly. That wasn't an awesome experience, but you could tell that 10 years down the line, it would transition into something more meaningful. So just leading with what the ultimate value is ends up being pretty important in design to us. I think I've heard this story from like 4 different university campuses now, but like they tell the thing where the quad was created where the students walk, and they decided to not pave it and left it as grass, and then just ended up paving where people naturally went. I don't know what university initiated that, but I do know it's a useful design story. And so for us, it's a lot of like building a field for people to play in, and then seeing where they congregate. Doing a lot of A/B testing, seeing what language works best to help users actually on-ramp via, and what converts the best. Concretely, one of the challenges, there's a lot of things that make sense in the crypto ecosystem don't make sense outside of it. So like, if you, again, go on the street and try to explain what a seed phrase is to someone, you're probably going to have a difficult time selling them on the value. Yeah. So for us, it's about making the thing that you're doing legible, and our specific interaction on that is largely tied to entering the ecosystem. So how do you prove your identity and fund your account and make purchases on that? 10 years ago, you would say you were buying something on the internet. Today, you would just say you're buying something.
So you would say your approach is more like pro-consumer, and you're not trying to be, we're telling you how it should be, we're looking at the user and see how they behave.
Yeah, very much so. I enjoy when you asked if there were experts in the room, because none of us are experts in everything. Like, those don't really exist. I think we have to start with hypotheses and then just be very willing to admit when those are wrong. And you'll see pretty quickly in doing user research what makes sense and doesn't make sense. Because when you're embedded in something so closely and intimately, it's very easy to assume that everyone understands your perspective right away, and most of the people that are using your product probably don't right away.
So what are the challenges right now? What do you see as the big challenge to adoption, to growth in the field? What should people think about?
Concrete value, the use case, doing something cool versus doing something useful. I think on the financial services side, a lot of that concrete value has been espoused to make 30% on your investment, which is probably not awesome in the long term. The thing that excites me as the first kind of front door use case is Web3 as identity. So in the history of human transaction, most things have been implicit. If I was making a purchase, I was physically in a store, I saw a person, we transacted with something physical. Then we went to it being explicit again. So when I create an account on Facebook, I have to give all of the data points. Yeah. And I think Web3 is on the journey to making that implicit in a very user-friendly way. So I don't create an account, I log in with my wallet. That proves value and brings back the magic of what Web 2 was in the early days.
So you have to pay close attention to the users and what they do. Jouni, what do you see as a user research role in this, and how do you practically use it?
Yeah, so I'm really happy to see people like Georgia entering the space. I think there's been sort of a lack of maturity. I think all the things that mentioned before, the background of people starting projects is different, but I think I think I'd like to sort of split the friction or the sort of thing where blockchain is broadly difficult to use into two spots. So I think there's, on one level, there's just sort of inherent blockchain friction with seed phrases, transactions, gas fees, all this kind of stuff that you can sort of work around that a little bit with UX, but you're sort of limited at what you can do. And then on the other hand, you've got sort of the product level choices where it's really broadly the same as Web 2. Like, are you making a product that people love? Are you making a product that people care about? What are the sort of shortcuts to understanding what people want? Is it easy for them to use that you can do on the product level? I think that's where UX research is super useful. It's really a superpower. Like, it's still, I think, more art than science. I think there's no sort of like step 1, 2, 3 to product market fit. You have to sort of do a lot of dancing, try a lot of different things, but it can save you a lot of time, a lot of money, a lot of frustration, I think. So to understand, to start very early, again, just to echo what was said before, to get design in the room as early as possible, not sort of as an afterthought that usually happens, where you can start thinking about that. Because design is far more than just sort of how it looks like. It's very intrinsically tied with the sort of the value people get from it. So I think, yeah, just starting to do more very early stage user research if we were even write a single line of code, smart contract code, just start with, okay, what do people want? How do they want to use it? Build some quick prototypes, because designing at that stage is quite cheap versus, writing 6 months of solidity and then doing the audits and then finding out it's not actually what people wanted in the first place, and you have to go back and change everything. So I think, yeah, that's what I would start with. And I try to hammer in the value of UX research. And I think a lot of Web2 organizations already sort of internalized this. This is not a new concept. It's around, but it's just the level of maturity, I think, making more projects aware of the usefulness of these tools, I think.
I think maturity in the field helps. So if you can just get people who are experienced, and if you can find experienced people connected to Web3, you can bring in people from traditional sectors. Because a lot of times people underestimate the value of the experience, and that not that many things changed really in this field. So Desi, this brings us to you. What do you see the role of design, the visuals, the nice things, but also the UI UX backend and things that are hidden behind these beautiful graphics? How do you see yourselves as designers in this field?
Yeah, first of all, we have to make clear that we cannot put all Web3 users in one bucket. Similar to Web 2, we have all kinds of projects, and we have to cater for their different user needs. But the primary use of UX, as it's always been, not just in Web 3, not just in Web 2, but also forever, it's to facilitate adoption. And in the context of Web3, this mainly means designing for trust and designing for inclusivity, targeting these two main pain points of the space. And of course, educating the user where needed. So people keep saying education is what's going to bring growth. Yes, education, but we have to be thinking of offering fun, entertaining experiences to people so it doesn't feel like huge effort or you're experiencing the product without realizing that you are being educated. No one's going to read your white paper or watch your YouTube video unless they're a developer and you're working in a really deep DeFi sector. And I think another very important point to make is looking at the role of the designer as a product person and going through the user jobs and need, what is the target audience, what is the competitive landscape, understanding these things, because the Web2 companies, they have mastered that. You wouldn't be able to see an investor if you hadn't nailed the answers to these questions before, right? While now we see many Web3 teams really being motivated by utilizing the technology, building something fun and exciting, but not exactly solving a problem. Of course, there is the element of innovation. We are designing for the future. Many of the Web3 products, they're for the future, but we have to be honest with ourselves and say, okay, this is how the space is growing. This is my total addressable market at the moment. Given this rate, what is going to be my market in 5 years? Can I keep growing? And we had projects at Pony where throughout the project, branding project, the team realized that their total addressable market was so small that even if they captured 50% of it, which we know it's crazy, they still wouldn't have a viable business, and they had to pivot really. So the bottom line is, what I'm trying to say is that we cannot rely on UX to fix the lack of product market fit. That's impossible.
And also the design space has evolved in the past couple of years, and it has like a big branding aspect, right? It has aspect like how does your company look like, how does it feel, how will it grow? And I think that people sometimes underestimate what designers really do. They still think about it as the assets, the images that you put on a website. So I would like to ask both of you, what do you see there when it comes to growth of design space in connection to Web3 and your role generally in product building? So we can start with you, Desi, since you're pretty excited to go, I see, and then we can go to Jouni.
I can talk about Web3 branding for hours, but I know there is a panel after us that's going to be focusing on that, so I'm going to keep it short. So what is really exciting at the moment is that we are dealing with many companies that have the audience, they have the community without even having a proper logo and a website, let alone branding. So that is really unprecedented. We haven't seen this before. What companies are interested in is building with the community as opposed to building with community, which is a really novel concept when it comes to branding because we're used to that, the experts. We create the brand for the community so we can help them stand out and so on and so on. So that's really interesting. We're at Pony, we're very interested in exploring. Very difficult to not let this to be a very chaotic process, but there are definitely ways. And probably a couple of really important points when it comes to branding. One is, like, as in any industry, there are trends which, when overused, they become a cliche. So we, for example, in the last couple of years, we've seen the influx of brands that are like really into this dark, mysterious look and feel, and then the pixelated art, which is fine. We love this branding.
A lot of people are like, yeah. That.
I'm sure like 90% of the projects is that what they have at the moment, which is fine. It's perfect. But what we have to be doing is do visual analysis of the competitive landscape and just try to identify gaps and opportunities on the market that we feel that we could explore. So you can bring your build your brand equity. And probably another important point would be the messaging and how clear we communicate what the brand is about. Going back to the 15 minutes rule, like, can users understand what your product is about in the first few seconds of like visiting your website? Many of the companies who work, the people who this product is for, they would get it straight away, right? Well, that's not exactly the case. Going back to the total addressable market and the B2B space, sometimes the decision makers are not exactly people who are like really a deep Web3 user. So we have to be thinking about them when building the messaging as well.
Jouni, do you want to join in?
Yeah, I think I agree with everything you said, and I think the role of branding is becoming more and more important. I think also like even when I look at some products like Aave, like it's just so recognizable. The ghost. We put a lot of effort into sort of creating like swag, very high quality swag, and with other products that we're building as well. I think often starts with the branding. Or branding's sort of very early on in there, because you have to separate. You have to somehow distinguish. You have to people have to remember it. They have to feel good about the product they use, and I mean it goes beyond the sort of logo to the whole brand effectively, like the messaging, the sort of small interactions that make you smile. I think also we're starting to move into a slightly new era. I think with the ability of, so far it's just mostly been financial applications, and maybe the branding is, I wouldn't say less important, but at least perceived as such. But I think the technology is finally getting ready for more sort of mainstream non-financial applications, or at least non-speculative applications, like we're seeing social media with Lens and other protocols, where I think the branding and the user experience generally is very important. There's a very high bar. Also, I think users generally are sort of less willing to accept sort of subpar experience. So I think we're going to have to compete a lot harder with Web2 equivalents on every level of the design, including branding.
The competition side is so true and so important to realize that like soon you will have other corporations who are not necessarily Web3, they don't have Web3 mindset and they don't want to have, and they will be competing with Web3 brands in a sense. And also upcoming projects, there is a big growth is in like fashion, you know, in metaverses and ticketing and all kinds of applications where you will suddenly need to compete with traditional businesses. So that's going to be super important to keep the design. So moving on to transition from Web 2 to Web 3, what are the biggest differences you see in UX, Georgina?
Biggest differences in the UX between the two?
The transition from Web 2 to Web 3.
Okay, so I think on some topics that we've already touched on, trust and education are really important aspects for Web3 user experience. You know, thinking about how trust is, I guess, implicit in a lot of the Web2 services we use, but now we venture into the Wild West where you cannot rely on the information in front of your eyes. So building signifiers for trust. Sometimes that might even mean intentional friction on the user journey. Like when you're designing the experience, let's say, like a checkout experience, right, in Web2, I've bought the wrong thing. I'll just email customer services, or you know they might give you like a grace period for you to cancel your order, and you know, and other experiences just in the centralized world. Let's say, for example, you lose your debit card or credit card, you just call the bank and it gets cancelled. Now we're in a space currently where those protections and guardrails are not there. So that means that a user needs to feel really informed about the decision that they take and the actions that they take, and know that they can trust the thing that you're getting them to do. I do a lot of research for wallets. Wallets generally do a very poor job of informing the user about what is happening at that moment. You shouldn't rely on your connected wallet to inform the user. Your UI should be telling them exactly what's happening, what to expect at the end as well. So better expectation settings. One thing I would say as well that I think as we transition, like I said before, you often don't know how something works until you've actually used it in Web3, and that's a poor experience. I want to see more simulation. We can do loads of things off-chain that allow people to get a sense of what it is like and what the outcome will be of their action without actually getting them to pay for anything. So I'd like to see a lot more of that as it happens.
That's so true. So that one side is very important now. Transitioning from fiat to crypto, what do you, Zak, see happening there?
Yeah, so I think a lot of very similar things. That wallet user research certainly rings true to me. And tying in Jouni's earlier point, bringing design into the process early is very important for wallet adoption in general. So, you know, Web 2 to Web 3 transition, there is just like frankly less room for error in Web 3. When you're interacting with a product for the first time, that needs to be magic. Like the happy path for Web 3 is really good, and that's why most of us are interested in here. The unhappy path is tragic. Like if someone doesn't know what's going to happen, they've sent their money to something that's pure speculation and it's gone down. Like securities laws exist for a reason. So spending, you know, design time, making sure that that first interaction is really, really good, is important in making the fiat to crypto bridge accessible. And then just sort of, again, to rehash a point, like leading with value and then making sure that users don't feel whiplash when, okay, I've funded my account, now what do I do? I've made a transaction, now what do I do? Why is it taking so long to run? You know, just making sure that people aren't surprised because, you know, by nature, a lot of the people that are onboarding for the first time don't understand what's happening in the background, and you can't lead with your terminology for something that's, you know, happening for the first time. And so sort of integrating that Web 2 terminology, using things that people know. You know, Plaid is an open banking platform. On very few to zero of our, you know, user-facing journeys will you see the words open banking because people don't know what that is. So,
which is a very important motto in Facebook, like no surprises. And I think that coming from Web 2, where it was centralized, big companies were making big moves, and it took a lot of time behind the scenes to develop something that we didn't see, and then we saw it when it was like when the product was out. But now I think the eyes are on us much sooner. in the early stages of the product, and so it's much less room for error, let's say.
Yeah, and simplicity is really forefront. So I use a Starbucks example for basically everything because they're just very good at building digital products. Up until pretty recently, Starbucks had more transaction volume than Apple Pay and Google Pay, and up until slightly before that, than both of them combined. And for kind of 5 years before they launched the pay with QR that just instantly got mass adoption, there were other people tinkering around with what's a good contactless way to pay? How can people use their cards without physically presenting them in the store? And Starbucks themselves spent a couple of years building that before someone on the team had a good idea to just say, hey, people are used to barcodes. What if we make them scan their barcodes? And that got adopted basically instantly, not because it was technically complicated, not because it was a particularly interesting solution. It was just easy and well integrated into the world that people were already familiar with.
The no surprises part was really hard for me because that's something that before you had a traditional businesses, you're trying to differentiate them, so you're coming with creative solutions visually from a UX, UI perspective. But now this is very new to people. You don't want them to have a bad experience, so we have to go a step back in our creativity almost, and start very simple, and then once people get used to this, we can get crazy with what we do when it comes to experience. Jouni, hype, no hype. What's the difference? What is the advantage, disadvantage of the current situation? What was your experience?
Yeah, I mean, it sort of goes in waves, but I think there's good sides and bad sides. Good sides, I think, it is good because then it's sort of in front of people's eyes and we get more people interested. Whether it's for the right reasons or not, I'm not sure, but I think it's still good to get more people into the space, more capital into the space where hopefully it'll be better allocated in the future as we learn as sort of, instead of the Wild West, is a bit more responsible, I think, and comes with some milestones and so on. But I think generally, it's good. These hype cycles, I think they do tend to sort of die down as well. So I guess ultimately there needs to be enough value in it for people to sort of make use of it. So if I think about the early days of the internet, I mean, yes, there was hype and there were sort of people didn't necessarily. You got the famous Jeremy Paxson saying this is never going to take off and all this kind of stuff. But even then, there's a lot of sort of early value. So I remember being able to go on real-time chats in '95 and you could already see there's so much value. So I think we just have to we have to build more and more value. And I think the speculative hype use cases, it's interesting in the sense that it democratizes investing in much and sort of being part of value creation and sharing the value much better than before. But I think, just sort of going YOLO with different fundraising and projects that don't raise a lot, don't deliver. I think that's sort of negative side. I think hopefully we learn from this cycle. Yeah.
Is there some difference in the user experience research side? Do you see different behaviors? How does it help companies that maybe the hype is not as high, or what was different then and now?
Does the hype affect it? It certainly affects engagement in a lot of the products, and a lot of users who are really only there for investment speculative purposes go dark. They just sit with the funds in their wallets waiting for an opportunity coming later. In terms of user research, though, that doesn't stop. And the interesting thing about UX research, user research, is that the users remain the same regardless of the hype cycle, right? They still have the same needs, behaviors, well, not sometimes the same behaviors, but needs and motivations and their intrinsic goals. So understanding those is actually very, very useful. If you can build for that in a bear market, then you're going to do great in a bull market. So I think that's where some projects have failed, where they can only exist in a bull market, because that's really the only value they're providing is speculation. And as soon as it crashes, we've seen 90% of projects just disappear, and that happens every cycle. So don't be one of those. Try and build something that does provide value, and think of for longevity, not short term.
So let's go a quicker round now, starting with you, Desi. And I'm thinking, what are the things that we could do differently in the next 12 months, let's say, right? Like, what are the differences we do in design? What are the differences we do, what's upcoming on chain? When it comes to UX, UI, the product, what will be the innovation that's coming in the next year so people can be ready for it?
So I think according to different sources, there are 150 million crypto wallets at the moment, and there are 4.7 billion internet users. So the no-brainer is we have to make sure that the space feels inclusive for everybody. And like the way to facilitate this would be through just building as frictionless as possible experiences, making sure that everyone everyone feels welcome. And another approach that we usually advise when we work on products would be, can we start building adaptive experiences? So we offer different user journeys to Web3 users and to people who are new to the space. So this is definitely one way to be thinking about it. How can we keep bringing more people into the space?
And where can people see some insights or what other people are doing? Do you have like some superpower? Is it Behance? Is it like just finding different companies? Where do you get inspiration from?
So yeah, we get inspiration from like millions of places really. But as I said earlier, try not to do what's already been done. Try to explore different styles that are to come so you can be the trendsetter. So that's really important when it comes to branding.
Yeah, always trying to push and bring something new to the table.
Yeah, exactly.
Uni, on your end?
Yeah, I'm really excited about finally being able to abstract some of the more pain away, like in terms of gas fees and signing for transactions. So there's mostly sort of technical solutions, but I think even for non-technical people or designers, it's good to be sort of aware of what might be coming. So I think account abstraction is one thing I'm very excited about, being able to sort of do away mostly with a seed phrase if you want to have social recovery. Also being able to sort of not have to pay gas fees every time, so the apps can actually pay for the gas fees. There's lots of different sort of technical solutions for these, like depending on the chain you're using, like dispatchers or sort of delegating the signing to another account, which are more technical. You can talk with the developers, but I think I would start looking into that because that's ultimately, if we want to bring on more and more regular people, you know, they don't have to know how the car works to be able to drive it, or you know, people don't need to know how HTTPS works to use the internet. So I think it's the same for us. So yeah, I think those kind of abstractions, that technical innovations that are finally coming on, that allow us to, as designers, to design the journeys that we always wanted to design but couldn't before, basically.
Yeah, that's a good point. Zak, I think that connects well too.
Yeah, I have the same point, but I'll call it legibility instead of complexity abstraction. If you want to onboard, you know, the difference between 150 million and 4.7 billion, people aren't going to remember the wallet ID. That's not particularly interesting. Coinbase worked with ENS to launch a legibility product in the last week or so. I think we'll see a lot more of that. And then for us, just kind of selfishly and narrow, if we want to, you know, bring those people that aren't onboarded yet to crypto, we need to make sure that their on-ramp is easy, that the exchanges that we work with have broader access to financial infrastructure in new markets. So just continuing to build, you know, local relationships with banks in those markets across Europe and across the world, where users will ultimately bring their funds from, is our focus area.
Great. What's new? What's coming in the next 12 months?
One thing that I'm seeing, which we've alluded to on the panel here, is product designers being hired much earlier on in the setup of an organization or a company building a product. I see this a lot more. The quality of applicants to those roles is much higher. So I would really want to see a bit more crossover between the Web 2 experts into Web 3, rather than an adherence to, well, this person's like immersed in Web 3 and they're a user, let's train them to do X, Y, Z, or they're willing and able to do X, Y, or not able, willing and have time to do X, Y, Z. And so a lot of those tasks are given to those individuals instead of actually just hiring a professional to do it. So I'm seeing a lot more of that improved UX maturity. I think that teams are beginning to think a bit more critically about the assumptions baked into the product design that they're working on as well. Thinking about their user audience as well, not just building for everyone, but being a bit more specific about which part of everyone is it that you're building for, what problem is it solving, and I am seeing teams do that, which is exciting.
Which is always good to build the expertise board as soon as possible. Just bring in the designer, bring in the product builder, bring in everybody you can, even though you think there might not be necessary, but you're bringing them behind one table at the beginning and they might give you some insights, right? Something you wouldn't think of. And I think people don't realize how similar these things are. I was surprised when you told me that it's not that new what's happening in user research, and it's pretty much still the same approach because people haven't really changed. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, sure. So I get asked a lot, like, what's different about UX research in Web3? And it's practically nothing. It's exactly the same as UX research in Web2 because you're dealing with people. And actually, people have not changed a lot in like the last several hundred years when you really think about intrinsic needs and motivations and their goals. You know, desire to feel safe, to feel part of something. All of these things are actually like the jobs to be done. Essentially. It's a bit like, I've done a big study, a jobs to be done study for MetaMask recently, which involved lots of user interviews and a survey, right? Just really out-of-the-box tools for a UX researcher. It's not reinventing the wheel at all. And that was all about understanding, well, you know, the job to be done is not make a transaction. The job to be done is support my family or, you know, feel part of a community or something like that. So going and finding what those jobs to be done is really valuable. But yeah, the tools themselves are exactly the same. The only difference, I would say, we had a conversation earlier about research in the metaverse. So I'm doing a big study at the minute for Protocol Labs on the experiences of users in the metaverse, but I'm now doing a little side project which is doing research in the metaverse. So being a person walking around in Decentraland and crypto voxels, observing humans and their behaviors within and trying to work out whether this is a useful research method. So we might see some new things coming.
Yeah, because we have to realize that we're living embodied lives, right? Like we have our bodies that have certain inputs, they work in a certain way, and so a lot of things will stay the same, but we're also slowly evolving and we can bring new experiences to people. So the balance there is very kind of hard to keep, and we need experts and really pay a lot of attention and give it the time to kind of really think these things through. So I will open it up to a couple of questions, and we're finishing up. So anyone has a very specific question when it comes to, I'm building a project, I need help with this?
Don't all rush, folks.
Yeah. Any product builders here? User experience, questions connected to the panel? Yeah. Let's go, guys.
Hello, thank you. Often in the Web3, the websites and the user experience is driven by the smart contracts. For instance, you have to allow the usage of the contracts and then you can use it. So the user can see these actions. It's like in the Web2 where you have to sign up and then log in and then you can use the website. Can we do something to hide this to the user and leave the machinery behind the curtain to avoid this?
Yeah, I think that's the bit I'm really starting to get excited. We can hide some of this complexity. There's going to be sort of technical solutions where you can bundle transactions. So instead of, do the allow and wait for it to mine, 2 minutes later you just sign another transaction. We can just sign a couple of things at once, or even sort of give some level of granular sort of permissions to different apps that they can. Or your wallet can sign certain things on your behalf, so there's less frequent signing, and you don't get a pop-up every 2 minutes when you're trying to do something. So I think there's more technical solutions coming on, but as designers we have to be aware of what's possible. So to work closely with developers, I think is another key. That's where the magic really happens when there's sort of very close collaboration, I think.
Yeah, I would just add to that you need product design, working with engineers. Smart contracts are a user experience problem. how Ethereum works is a user experience challenge. And so really we should have had product designers thinking about that right at the start, not several years later. So I think the solution is to really be thinking about that before smart contracts are written. But yeah, there are some new features of blockchain coming that will enable some of this stuff to happen, yeah.
Okay, so hands up, who has worked with dedicated UX? Developer, researcher? No hands up? One hand, two hands? Okay, a couple of people. So there's definitely room to grow, to include more user research and experienced product builders. You have one more question, so let's try that.
Yeah, I'm building a Web3 product at the moment. I have a team of really skilled developers who are very much in the crypto space. We want to try and make the UX as easy to use as possible, but many of the really good features of Web3 require that you have things like seed phrases, and so much of that is hard to bridge. I'm just wondering if anyone's got any experience of how to get the really good crypto developers to really lend themselves to an easy user experience.
It's a tough one.
What is the product?
It's a Web3 podcasting app.
Okay, excellent. So in terms of what you could be doing, would be, as many Web2 companies are doing, you can allow the user to experience the product without asking them to engage further, without asking them to connect their wallet, without asking them to do any effort and kind of reward them for their engagement. Many Web2 companies have done this successfully, so that works really well for adoption.
So I'd like to thank to our panel. I'd like to thank to our audience that you're interested in these topics. And I would say don't be shy to follow us, connect with us, reach out if you're thinking about these topics. I think the panel will definitely share some more insights throughout the year on socials. So thank you very much and have a wonderful day. Thanks.